Today we're going to be talking about how to safely operate a forklift, how to move material, stack crates, travel up and down, ramps in and out of the building. We're going to go through a lot of different things like that today, so let's get started. What is a fork truck? Fork truck is a heavy machine that allows us to be able to move and stack, heavy containers, be able to unload and load trucks, and move our product from one location to another. In this video, we're going to be talking about all the different components of a fork truck, some of the terms and the verbiage that we use when we're describing the truck, but also how to safely operate it. Some of the safety concerns that we have, when we're using a fork truck. But also we're going to talk quite a bit, about what kind of damage can this fork truck do to our buildings, to vehicles, things like that. So we need to take a good look at how this thing works, how to safely operate it. So these are going to be the items that we talk about in this video. Now, before you can properly and safely operate a lift truck, fork truck, you want to inspect the data plate of the unit, of the fork truck. It's going to give you all the particular information. Now, I mentioned earlier, each fork truck has a weight limit. How much weight can it pick up and how high can we lift it while keeping the fork truck stable. So you need to know what's on this data plate. Most loads, like I mentioned earlier, are rated in about a 24-inch cubic square. So if you lift it up, your fork truck can't carry as much weight the higher you lift it. If it's on the end of your fork truck won't be able to carry much weight on it because you're changing the balance point. You got to look at your front drive wheels as being a fulcrum. And if you move the weight around on your forks, you're going to change the balance point of the fork truck. So you need to spend a little bit of time getting to know that data plate and understand what it's telling you, so that way you know how to safely operate this fork truck. If we damage a lot of product, it's going to create a lot of cost for the company and creates a whole lot of set of issues for us. So we need to make sure that we know what the fork truck is, what it can do, what it's capable of, and make sure that we don't operate it outside the design conditions put on it by the manufacturer. Now, before operating the fork truck, we need to do a quick walk around, do a safety inspection, make sure that our wheels are pretty good shape. You usually have a hard rubber wheel if you're using a fork truck that's used indoors on flat surfaces. If you have one that's made for outdoor use, you're going to have more of a all-terrain type of tread tire on there, and then in some cases they might be pneumatic. So we need to inspect your tires, first off. Check your hoses on your hydraulics to make sure you don't have any, hoses that are showing excessive wear. Because if you have a hydraulic hose bust on you, you could be saturated, your clothes, your skin with hot hydraulic oil, which could cause serious burns. So we need to inspect the fork truck, make sure that we don't have any hydraulic lines that are leaking. We also want to check the functionality of the fork truck itself. It has to have a working horn on it. Headlights, I like to check the headlights, and if you've got a flashing backup light, you need to inspect that. Also the backup beeper. Most fork trucks come with a beeper. When you have it in reverse, it's going to beep and let people know that you might not be able to see that you're in the area. If you're driving a gas-operated vehicle, we need to make sure that we check the oil periodically on the fork truck, usually the start of every shift, to confirm that we've got enough oil in the system to protect the motor. But we also need to make sure that we've got plenty of fuel, whether it's a gas-operated or an LP tank, we need to make sure that we've got plenty of fluids there to be able to operate the fork truck. Now let's visibly inspect the tires, make sure that we don't have any chunks taking out of the tire. The tread is in good shape. If it's going to be used outside of the building on a gravel parking lot, that it does have a certain amount of tread left on the tire. The counterweight is what's going to be able to balance the fork truck out when we're carrying a load. Your front wheels that are right next to the mast are your pivot point of the fork truck. So when we're carrying a heavy load on the forks, we need to have a counterweight that can keep the steering tires on the ground, keep the fork truck balanced, and allow us to be able to move it from one location to the next. Now the fork truck, the mast on this fork truck is controlled by hydraulics. The hydraulic cylinders is going to allow us to be able to lift the load up, be able to shift it from side to side, or it's going to be able to tilt the mast back and forth so we can control the load as we're traveling. With the fork truck's foot controls, of course, you're going to have your accelerator pedal, which is going to control the engine RPM, of course. Then you're going to have a brake, and then you've got kind of like a clutch brake, which is going to allow you to be able to speed the motor up, to be able to raise, for an example, raise a box higher up a little bit faster. So you're going to have a clutch brake, which is going to engage the clutch but disengage the drivetrain of the forklift, allow you to be able to do more work a little bit more efficiently. Now be careful not to be too hard on the brake, or when you're using the levers to control the mast operation, be easy on those controls. The controls on the fork truck are going to allow us to be able to, pick the load up, lower it back down, be able to tilt the mast back and forth, which is going to change the fork position. And on a lot of fork trucks, you can have a side shift, which is going to move the load from the right to the left to be able to center it up and be able to stack boxes or, things like hog crates or metal containers. So we'll be able to stack those up without having to constantly, back up and pull forward, back up, pull forward. Now when your fork truck gets low on fuel, if you're using LP tanks, we need to make sure that we have our gloves on, because if you start spewing out fuel when you loosen up the fitting, this fuel is going to be really, really cold. It could cause frostbite on your hands, so make sure that you're wearing gloves, some type of eye protection, a safety glasses or a shield in front of your face in case it blows out in your face, that you don't get frostbite on your skin or possibly damage your eyes. When you're going to change out your tank, remove your empty first. One of the things you should do is turn the valve off on your tank. Allow the engine to run until it uses up all the fuel in the line, until the motor dies, then turn the key off. And at that point, you'll have no pressure from the valve, going to the tank in the tank itself, because you've already turned that valve off. So shut your valve off, run your engine till it dies, then turn the key off, unscrew the fitting off your tank, place the tank in a secured cage. Once you're done with that, pull out a full tank, properly secure the doors or whatever you've got to secure the tanks with, and then place that on the fork truck. Make sure the valves are closed on these before tightening up. Put your fitting on, secure the rack, the tank inside the rack, close all the latches. If you have damaged latches on the fork truck itself, we need to get those repaired. So after you get that done, then you can open up your valve. and then, you know, put the fork truck back in service. Now the operator had already removed the empty tank and secured it in the rack, which is outside. He's making sure the tank is sitting firmly in its cradle, and then he's strapping it down, make sure that the locking mechanism is good and tight, and that the tank's not going to rattle around or possibly fall off. Now here they're securing the valve, the fitting to the valve on the tank. Notice that he is not wearing protective gear, and that is a no-no. We should not do this. You need to have gloves on, and then have some type of safety glasses or face shield just in case fuel starts spewing out and it doesn't get all over your car and causing frostbite. Here we can see the parking brake must be applied when the fork truck is stationary, and then we've got our forward and reverse selector. Before operation, we need to check the oil, check the antifreeze in the motor, make sure that everything's in good condition, and we've got plenty of fluids in the fork truck to be able to operate it safely. Now I mentioned a few minutes ago that the balance point of the fork truck is going to be your front wheels, your drive wheels. So when you're carrying a heavy load, that's going to be your pivot point. So if your load is heavier than what the fork truck is rated for, and you don't have a large enough counterweight on the back of the fork truck, then the fork truck could tip over, you know, falling forward, spilling the load, and possibly harming the driver. So we want to pay attention to the data plate of the fork truck, because this data plate that we'll see here in a little bit is going to tell us how much weight can it carry, how high can we lift it, and it's usually built on, you know, your gross weight that it can move is built on 24-inch centers all the way up against the mast, you know, 24 inches high and 24 inches off the mast towards the end of the fork. That's the way this thing is rated at, and we'll show you some examples as we go through this. Now these are your drive wheels, the front wheels of the fork truck. It's your fulcrum point, it's your balance point. The load needs to be stabilized from the counterweight all the way to the tip of the fork. Now at the end of the day, or any time you're getting off the fork truck and parking it for a period of time, few things that we need to do. We need to make sure that we lower the forks all the way to the ground, and that the tips of the forks are flat on the floor. This is going to eliminate a tripping hazard. We need to also shut off the fuel tank to make sure that if we did have a possible fuel leak, that we don't have an explosion or something like that inside the building after hours, because that's going to be a significant loss to the company, and also it could wind up shutting down that branch for a while and people losing their livelihood. So it's always a great idea to put your forks all the way down. The tips of the forks need to be touching the floor, and that we shut the fuel off any time that we're not using that fork truck. Now this is the proper placement for the tips of your forks when the fork truck is not being used. You can see where it's firmly, the tips are on the ground, eliminates a tripping hazard. You always want to make sure the condition of your hoses, visibly inspect them at the end and at the beginning of every shift to make sure you didn't miss something, because it could present a pretty significant problem for us. Also make sure that your headlights and your flashing light and your backup beeper is working properly. When operating the fork truck, try to be easy and smooth on the controls. When exiting the building on a ramp or coming back up the ramp, try not to drive excessively fast. Keep your forks raised slightly off the floor to keep them from banging. Always use your horn before turning blind corners so you can let somebody know that you're coming. Now, anytime you're driving off the, a dock plate, over a dock plate to get onto a semi-truck, we need to proceed with caution. Try not to drive too fast because the trucks can move. The dock plates can shift, so we need to make sure that everything's good and secure and that we cross that little bridge, at a proper speed. All semi-trucks need to be chalked before we drive on them. Even box trucks, things like that, we need to have the tires chalked on those trucks. That'll prevent the truck from rolling forward when you pull onto it, possibly dumping you and the forklift into the parking lot, which could cause seriously harm to you in the vehicle. When carrying loads, if the load is low enough on the forks and we can see without having any obstructions through the mast, then it's permitted to be able to drive forward. But anytime the load blocks your field of view through the mast of the fork truck, you have to drive backwards until you get to the spot where you're either going to stack your product up or you're going to load a customer's vehicle. Anytime you're traveling down an incline, you need to drive backwards with the load up high and rested all the way against the mast to keep the load from shifting. When you're going down a hill, you need to have it go down backwards. But if you're going up the hill, have the load up high, all the way up against the mast, and then travel in the forward direction. When traveling down the ramp with a load, always keep your load to the highest point. You want to have it securely on the forks and up against the mast to help keep that load stabilized. Here you can see where he's traveling with just a few inches off the pad itself and driving at a good safe speed. And it's the same when you're traveling up a ramp. You want to keep the load up against the mast, securely on the forks, and travel there again at a safe speed. When turning corners, mind your speed there because you could cause the load to shift and fall off the forks. If we can see through the mast, if we can't see through the mast, we got to travel in reverse. But we also want to keep the load fairly low to the ground, not so where the skids are banging on the ground or the forks are hitting the ground, but just high enough to have plenty of clearance in between the floor and the bottom of our load, but not so high that it's going to create a tipping problem. Because if you've got too much weight on the fork, you turn the corner, you're changing the lateral balance point of the vehicle as well, and you could flip the fork truck over on its side. So turning corners, we've got to be real careful how high we've got the load lifted up. Traveling across a straight floor, flat floor, we got to be mindful of that as well. Anytime you're operating the fork truck outside, super critical to make sure that we know where that balance point of the vehicle is from front to back, but also left to right. When carrying double stacked boxes, always travel at a safe speed. Be easy on your controls. Don't try to pull them too fast or jerk on them. It'll cause the forks to, the bounce up and down, could cause you to lose the load. You want to try to keep the top surface of your forks flat or slightly tilted down, so when you're pulling in underneath the skid, you're not jabbing your forks into the bottom of the skid, and then you don't actually push on the skid itself and cause the upper package to be able to dump off the back side of the one on the bottom. You need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to know the area that you're going to operate the fork truck in. You got to make sure that you know where there's any holes or pits in the floor or cracks that might cause your fork truck to bobble from side to side, allowing the load to become unstable. So we need to make sure the areas that we're operating it in, they got to be free of debris on the floor, so we need to keep the floors nice and clean as best we can. Scrap pieces of wood that come off wooden pallets need to be picked up. Plastic wrapping that some of the boxes are wrapped in, we need to make sure that we keep that off the floor, that the aisles are kept clean that we're driving in and out of. We just need to make sure of our surroundings and make sure it's going to be safe for us to operate this fork truck in the warehouse, back patios, or if we have to drive outside to be able to load a customer's vehicle. We just need to make sure of what these environments are that we're asking this fork truck to work in. While operating the fork truck, the operator is responsible for this vehicle. Few things that we never ever do. We never allow somebody else to ride on the fork truck. Never let somebody stand on the forks while you're lifting them up and down. They have to be in an approved cage that can be locked down to the fork truck. They have to be wearing some type of harness that keeps them from falling. So you never let passengers ride on it. We never smoke around the fork truck. When pulling up to a rack that you're going to take up a skid off an upper level, we want to approach that rack slowly, raise your forks up at a good safe speed. Try to keep the tops of your forks level or slightly pitched just a tad bit forward. Slowly approach your skid that you're going to be picking up. Enter in it slowly, so to make sure that you're not going to hit something on the back side of that skid, because there might be two racks together. Once you get to the point where you're going to lift it up, you can lift your forks, tilt them forward a little bit, and that will move it in closer. Slightly lift up on your skid and start to back up. You can tilt your forks back just a little bit, and that will help move the end of your skid off the rack system to make sure that you can pull it out safely. Lower it at a good safe speed. And when placing that skid back on the rack, there again, raise your forks up at a good safe speed to where you ensure that you can control it. Raise it up just slightly higher than the rack. Slowly drive into it, gauging your height. Once you get to where the skid's just about in place, you can tilt your mast forward just a little bit, drop your forks down, then slowly back out of it to make sure that your forks clear the skid and you don't actually try to pull the skid back off the rack as you're backing up. Back up at a slow motion. Lower your forks all the way back to the ground. Then drive away. Always remember to beep your horn going around a blind corner. Now, fork trucks do a lot of damage to buildings, so we've got to be really, really careful. You'll see some of the examples in some video that we have here, also some pictures where the fork trucks have hit walls and knocked bricks loose. There's been several buildings that have been torn down because a fork truck took out a metal support post. And it comes from people just not paying attention and knowing their surroundings. See, we got to make sure, because we can cause a lot of damage, property damage, and costing thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to our buildings. So we have to make sure that we're operating them safely, and that we know our environment, and what we can do with the fork truck and what we can't do with it, because there's a lot of liability that goes along with operating this fork truck. And when you're the operator, you're responsible. Now, if you do have some type of incident with the fork truck, whether you damaged a product or damaged the building or something like that, we need to report that. The store managers are going to be doing an incident report, filling out the paperwork to make sure that everything is well documented and covered. You might have to go back through a re-education period with the fork truck, or worst case, you could wind up losing your ability to be able to perform that function. So we need to make sure that anytime we do have an accident, that it is reported and well documented. Smoking is not prohibited while driving the fork truck, even while outside. So that's going to be a big no-no for anybody operating a fork truck for associated equipment. No smoking around that. Definitely no smoking around the areas where you store your LP tanks. Don't allow anybody within, I'd say probably 20 feet of when you're changing a tank, because there's always a certain amount of pressure there that could, spew out in the area, and if someone's smoking, you could ignite those fumes in the air, which would not be very much fun. So we need to make sure that nobody smokes within 20 feet of the fork truck while it's being operated and when you're changing fuel tanks. Now, for a quick review, the fork truck's going to allow us to do a lot of heavy lifting. We're going to get a lot of value out of being able to operate one of these. We'll be able to unload trucks, load them, load our customers, vehicles up with product. This allows us to be able to keep things moving. So we get a lot of good work out of the fork truck. But we just need to make sure that we're using it in a safe manner. We need to do our vehicle inspections prior to the start of every shift to make sure that the vehicle is in good working order. We've got to follow safety, regulations, especially when we're working around the fuel. We got to make sure that we're handling the fuel tanks properly, storing them in a sealed container or an area where it's going to be well ventilated. Never put a leaking tank inside the building. Let's get it outside. And then we need to call the company who does our tanks for us so they can secure this bottle and get it replaced for us. We got to make sure that we're traveling with a load on our forks in a safe manner. These trucks are really rated for a flat surface, so anytime that we're operating them outside, we got to make sure that the concrete that we're driving on or asphalt is in good condition. Be very careful on driving on gravel, because these drive tires can bury up into the gravel very easily. We got to make sure we know about the cracks and different bumps or holes in the surfaces that we're carrying, because that could cause our loads to become unstable and we lose a load. We also need to pay attention to that data plate. You have to read the data plate of that unit to make sure that you know how much weight this thing can handle and where it has to be positioned on the forks and how high you can lift it. So you got to know that data plate. That's going to tell you a lot of information about this particular fork truck. When traveling across dock plates, use a safe speed. Don't be going excessively fast, across these dock plates. Make sure the truck you're driving onto's rear wheels are chalked, because you could drive up and it rolls away from the dock and it dumps you in the parking lot. That's a very bad day for everybody involved. We got to make sure we're using our PPE, protective, gear, gloves, some type of safety glasses, things like that when working with the tanks, when we're changing tanks out. Try not to drive at excessive speeds. Drive at a normal speed. Use your horn coming around corners to let people know if they're in the aisle, you know, that you're coming that way. Always look behind you before backing up. Keep your warehouses clean. Keep the aisles clean, free of debris that could cause the load when you drive over. You know, a small piece of wood could cause your load to become unstable, especially if you're carrying several boxes high. So we need to make sure that we're keeping all of our areas cleaned up. Avoid driving on water. If you've got water on the floor, we've got to get that floor dried up before proceeding across that, because these tires are very slick. They'll slide and you could possibly hurt yourself or hurt the product or the building itself. Your store manager is going to have a little questionnaire that you're going to have to fill out, so make sure that when you fill this out you answer all the questions, that your CSR is going to have you're going to get that from them, and then when you're done filling it out, turn it back into him. Make sure that you put your name and date on it. Answer all the questions, because every employee for Associated Equipment that's going to operate a fork truck has to watch this video and complete the test at the end of it, or you won't be able to operate the vehicle. So just make sure that you get this done. We're going to have a short time to get it done. It all has to be processed by the end of the year. So spend a few minutes, watch the video incomplete, and then we'll get you the test and you can take that, and we'll wrap this up. This has been a production of Sound Lab Studios. Like and subscribe to HVAC is Win on YouTube for all of our future videos.